Welcome back to part 2 of our trifecta of digital storytelling episodes. On this second part, we are going to share the digital storytelling creation experiences of a group of fabulous humans who we had the privilege of connecting with courtesy of Bridge C-14. Now, I'm hoping, dear listeners, if you aren't finding yourself already familiar with Bridge C-14, that you will link to their website from our website, or just Google Bridge C-14 and learn about this fabulous not-for-profit organization led by the fabulous Lauren Clark, who we have interviewed previously on an episode here at Disrupting Death, and find out about the peer-to-peer support work that this organization does nationally in terms of linking people to learn more about accessing MAiD, some of the options and opportunities for people at the end of life. They have groups for people who are considering accessing MAiD. They have grief groups for people who have supported someone. And they connected with us and helped us to gather this group of fabulous humans that you are going to hear from today. Before we get to that, though, we want to do a shout out to the fabulous Dr. Mike Lang
of Mike Lang Stories,
who we had the privilege of connecting with when Carrie Lynn and I went to a digital storytelling conference called, of all things, Radical Listening Story Work for a Just Future. As you can imagine, we loved the title of the conference. We wanted to be able to show some of the digital stories we had worked on from our previous SSHRC Insight Development Grant and learn more about digital storytelling and how people were using digital stories in their research. And then lo and behold, we connected with another fellow Canadian. There was a handful of us in Washington, D.C., checking out the Smithsonian and learning from each other and some of the groups in Europe all over the place, how they were using digital stories. And Mike was somebody that I think we initially found an immediate connection to. Does that sound right, Carrie?
It absolutely does. I have been sat here as the little grammarian I am, thinking, what is the collective noun for Canadians when we are out and about? Maybe it's a boot of Canadians. I loved meeting Mike, and I think it's so exciting to share with our listeners that these two parts of the trifecta, these were all people who met with us in an online forum and created those stories, which is not the traditional digital storytelling format. But because COVID, capital T, capital P, the pandemic, we all learned as researchers to do that pivot and to move ourselves online and then to figure out how to have these incredible experiences virtually.
And I think we had learned from our first digital story pivot to the virtual world that the creation of that environment online is essential to the success of the development of the stories. You want to be able to create an environment that is welcoming, open, and safe for people to be talking about difficult things. And I know when I met Mike initially, and we started talking a little bit, let's be honest, Carrie Lynn, we've had a little bit of backlash, feels a little too harsh, but not everybody welcomes our work in medical assistance in dying with open arms. Not everybody is as accepting of it as we hope that they're going to be. And we think this makes sense, and we welcome diverse opinions and experiences around what people hope for, want, or think is appropriate at the end of life, but not in our digital storytelling team. We needed someone who had the ability to create a space and be a technological whiz to be able to produce the number of stories that we were after in a really time-limited timeline.
I think that's absolutely true. I think Mike was the pick for this kind of thing. He is able to hold space for those heavier conversations, and he shares a little bit about that in the interview that you're about to hear. He also has an affable nature that when he shows up on screen, his face, his voice, there's a welcoming, so that I think people are thinking to themselves, wow, this might be a steep learning curve, but this guy seems upbeat and excited about what we're going to do. And maybe I'm willing to give it a go because of that vibe. I want to also say, because we're being honest, that we talk to a lot of women in the work that we do. And what I love too about Dr. Mike was the fact that you're about to hear, if you tune in for part 3, that we had one male participant in the 2 groups with which we worked. And I like to think that participant maybe got to see reflected, you cannot be what you cannot see, looking at the screen and seeing Mike's face there.
And what an affable face it is. And so, listener, I hope you will check out Mike's website as well, because our project with the creation of digital stories is only one tiny piece of the massive amounts that Mike and his team, and you're going to hear from Crystal and Maureen, because Mike came with some backup, some very skilled facilitators who could add to our research team in the creation of digital stories. And it took a few of us together to be able to create the digital stories that you are going to see as you move throughout our website. So without further ado, let's chat it up with Dr. Mike Lang.
Mike, welcome. We're really glad you agreed to join us. And I wonder if we can start off, please, with you introducing yourself and how it all fits in with digital storytelling.
My name is Mike Lang. I'm a filmmaker and digital storytelling facilitator based out of Calgary, Alberta, affiliated also with the University of Calgary Faculty of Nursing as an adjunct. But really, the thing that I'm all about is healthcare and storytelling. So using film and digital stories in healthcare contexts. I've been able to work with close to 1,000 patients and families and family caregivers around the world, actually. And it's always amazing seeing how these stories can really help us understand at a deeper level. And I think that's one thing that, healthcare historically, right? We can give you lots of facts and knowledge, but we haven't been as good about sharing stories so that people can gain wisdom from those stories that then they can apply to their own lives. And so that's my MO. That's what I'm all about.
Thank you, Mike. What is a digital story, Mike?
Yeah. I always say there's a form to digital storytelling, but there is no formula, right? That's one of the wonderful things about these creative pursuits is that everyone can make it their own. But generally, what a digital story ends up looking like is a short, 3 to 4 minute film that uses photos, videos, a voiceover that someone writes themselves, and music and video editing techniques to tell an important story from your life. And the coolest part about it is that, as a documentary filmmaker, I do a lot of filming people and then I edit their stories together. And digital storytelling is so cool because they are in the driver's seat from the beginning to the end. It's their story, right? They write it, they choose the images. We teach them the video editing skills to put it all together themselves. Man, it's just really meaningful actually for people to be able to go through the process of creating their own story. So that's what I love about digital storytelling. It's also pretty low tech. And so I've been able to do a lot of projects in East Africa and South America and places around the world that sometimes have less access to technology.
I know that you and I and Kathy, we all have been on both sides. We've created digital stories and we facilitate workshops and so forth. What brought you to digital storytelling for yourself? And what are you hoping people have as takeaways from creating their own digital story?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I stumbled into digital storytelling by accident. I won't tell the whole story. It's a bit of a long one, but I made my first film when I was 25 after my own cancer experience. And through that, me and my buddy who were working on that film, we were sitting there at the end of editing in his editing suite. We looked at each other and I was like, Aaron, I feel like I have learned so much. I feel like a different person than when we sat down in here, a few months ago and first started watching through these interviews. And he said, me too. He's like, I can't believe how different I am at the end of this process. And I said, man, I wish everyone had a chance to make a film about their life. And then he said, well, why not? I mean, a lot of cancer survivors. Why don't you help them make their own films? And I was like, yeah, good point. Like, why not? I was like, all right, yeah, I'm going to try this. And so I actually started working with Wellspring Calgary. It's a cancer support organization. And I started helping them make short films, which I found out later were called digital stories. A researcher, Dr. Catherine Lang, called me up and said, Mike, I love what you're doing with all the cancer survivors and helping them make digital stories. I want you to come be my research assistant on some projects. And I said, what's a digital story? She said, what do you mean? That's what you're doing. So then, doing my master's and PhD, looking specifically at using digital storytelling in healthcare context. And to get to your second question, what do I hope for people as they tell their stories? I think I've just seen over and over again that all of us carry these untold stories within us, right? And when we get an opportunity to tell a story and have people actually listen and care about what we're saying, man, it's transformative on every level, right? It's transformative for the storyteller. It's transformative for the audience. And I would say it's also transformative for the facilitators. It's that element of making meaning out of the random and chaotic experiences of our lives through a facilitated process that, it's good for people. Everyone I work with, I want them, first of all, to be happy with the story they made and feel like it was a good process that they went through, but also ultimately to feel like they have a greater understanding of the wisdom that's embedded in their own experiences.
I love that. And we just finished the screening for the second group of digital story creators earlier this week. And it was on Zoom, and still I could feel the electricity in the room as people shared their stories. And I probably, if I had to count, cried 6 or 7 times watching the stories and laughed and swore and did the gamut of emotions. So when we met, Mike, I know medical assistance in dying wasn't an area that you hadn't gotten into at that point. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like creating and working with a group of people who'd accompanied someone who used MAiD? And what do you think, or what do you hope people will hear from their stories?
Yeah, I think I only worked with 2 people who'd ever told a story about medical assistance in dying. So yeah, it was a new world for me. And I think one of the main things that I took away from the experience was just the complexity of those emotional experiences, right? Incredibly complex. There's, honoring a loved one's wishes, and then there's, balancing that with the loss that you're feeling and experiencing, right? And, during that workshop, I just saw how hard it was for people, right? It wasn't an easy decision that was made. It wasn't an easy experience. It wasn't taking an easy way out. If any way, I would say, MAiD might be one of the harder choices that someone could ever make in their life, right? Counter to some of the cultural narratives that we hear out there, right? That's one of the big things I took away was how hard it still is. And I would say also the other one is, the amount of love that exists in the midst of those decisions, right? And again, that's sort of counter to some of the cultural narratives, some of the cultural conversations we hear out there that, that this is a result of isolation or this is a result of not receiving good enough care. And that's not what I experienced. All I saw was love and people trying to make the right decisions in incredibly complex and difficult circumstances. And so, really what I hope people take away from all the stories is just a greater understanding of the complexity of these decisions and an awareness that they're not made lightheartedly. There's going to be hundreds of thousands of people in Canada who've had to walk down this road with someone in their life that they love. And we need to think about how we're supporting them, right? We need to have the right supports in place for the Canadians who will care for someone who chooses MAiD.
Thank you.
And so, Mike, I'm hopeful, and I know you are too, that our listeners are going to listen to the podcast, click on the digital stories, and get their own conversations going.
One of the best things about a good story is that it starts meaningful conversation. And so I encourage, just don't watch it by yourself. Watch it with a friend, watch it with a family member. And afterwards, just share one thing that stood out to you in the story. And, when we do that, all of a sudden we get a deeper understanding of what was said in the story, but also of the person sitting next to us.
I'm confident you're going to continue to make the stories that we need to hear and learn from. And I look forward to our next adventure. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
Hey, thanks for starting these conversations. So I love what you guys are doing with the podcast and all the digital storytelling. All the best. And I'm sure our paths will cross again.
Me too.
So that was a conversation with Dr. Mike Lang from Mike Lang Stories. And now we are going to move on to the digital story creators from our first workshop. And leading us off is Lynn Chapman. And Lynn Chapman's digital story is called As Good as Death Can Be. So please check out Lynn's story on disruptingdeath.ca. We'd love to know what you think.
So, Lynn, thank you so much for joining us. I'm interested in hearing what motivated you to agree to make a digital story about your experience accompanying your husband who used MAiD.
British C-14 has been extraordinarily helpful for me. So part of it is a chance to give back. part of it is my commitment to having people understand MAiD and what's at play so that it's not a big mystery. And MAiD is an important right for people to have. And it's become political, and it shouldn't be. It's a personal choice. And so when things become political, I think real experience tells an important story.
And I think these stories are so important for many reasons. But how was the process for you, Lynn?
Well, for a non-techie person like me, I was really grateful for the support that made telling the story possible in a way that I had never imagined before. The other piece that was such a challenge was having to cut down what I had written originally from 8 minutes to sort of 3 to 4 minutes. And it was really a useful process for me in my own grieving. It helped my grieving. I had to be with some pain, especially the part about selecting the photos, coming to what really told the story. It was a clarifying process, and also it was a process of love and memory. I was so grateful for it in a way that I had never anticipated. At the beginning, it was about me giving back, and what my experience was, how much I got back, and also how useful it is to share with people. And I know that it's been useful to other people, just understanding what John and I went through. So my friends have seen it and my family's seen it. And I'm sharing it in different venues so that that story can be made available for people. Yeah.
Oh, wow, Lynn, there's so much there. I love that you've been sharing your story. Kathy and I are really curious about what you hope viewers take away from your story.
I hope people get the importance of openness, the importance of no secrets. I think secrets cause pain, and I understand how it can be that people don't want other people to know. I know that this is complicated. MAiD is a complicated process. And so because John and I were very open all the way through the process, it wasn't like secrecy just wasn't an option anyway. But it wouldn't have been an option for us in the way that he couldn't bear for others to know, because our practice in life is to be open. So it was consistent with our practice in life. I am aware of the cost of secrecy. And when I say secrecy, it's not that sort of spy novel secrecy. It's more like not being able to be open and share with others what is real in life. And if dying is what's real in life, not being able to talk about it makes loneliness so much more prevalent. Not being able to talk about it creates anxiety. And then for the griever, the costs of not having had the support that you would receive when you are open is tremendous. I've had opportunities to witness that over and over, and that the cost of secrecy and not being able to share your reality with people, it breaks my heart for others to go through it. So part of the reason that that part of it is in my digital story is just to say this is possible. Being open creates love, opportunities for love to be present, opportunities for compassion to be present. And then piece about the anticipatory grief, because it was such a huge surprise for me. I had no idea that's what was going on. And when I found out, oh, this is real, anticipatory grief is a very understandable experience. I wanted that part to be in it. And I wanted at the end for people who listen to know or to validate how it is for caregivers to be all about the person they're supporting and love to the moment of death. Bringing your beloved to the threshold is what this MAiD journey is about for so many people. The healing journey of writing through grief is so critical to me of access to witnessing your own grief And then if you have the opportunity to share what you're writing, to have it witnessed in a different way, that experience is really important. And I'm grateful for it. The other piece that was wonderful about the process was all the other people in it. They were so wonderful. I got to meet these wonderful people from across Canada. I got to hear other people's experiences in a really intimate, lovely way. So the support of the group, even though we were telling our individual stories, the sense of love and openness and care in that group of people I feel really connected to. I wish for others to have this opportunity.
Oh, Lynn, thank you. And I am so grateful that you were part of our digital story creation group and that technology didn't scare you off.
Thank you both for promoting this important work.
Next up, we are speaking with Amy Tsai, and her story that she created about her dad is called A Brave Goodbye.
Thanks for agreeing to speak with us, Amy. I'm interested in starting off with, why'd you sign up to do a digital storytelling workshop? And was it what you expected it was going to be?
Oh, great questions, Kathy. So I guess I first heard about this awesome digital storytelling workshop from Bridge C-14. And when I first heard about it, I'm at my sort of 5-year journey in terms of my grief journey, really. So it's been 5 years and I still struggle to share my true story. So when I heard about this digital story, I was very intrigued. I'm like, what is it? What does that mean, digital story? And I love storytelling. I'm a big believer in the impact of sharing stories. So when I heard about it, I was like, okay, I think it's time. And this was the year I was feeling like I needed to do some work for myself because I've been sort of being a grief support facilitator with Bridge C-14 for the past 2.5 years. And I would kind of just do a little bit of work for myself here and there. So I thought this was a really great opportunity. It seemed like fun because we would make little videos and I love making little videos. So I was very intrigued. I had no expectations and it turned out to be even more than I could ever imagine. It's been transformative. It's been impactful. It's been healing. And it feels like another little community. We just all care about each other. We care about each other's stories.
Amy, I love that on so many levels, but I want to acknowledge something that you said that I find is so refreshing to acknowledge that 5 years after the death of your dad, that you are grieving. And to say that out loud and to own that helps to normalize and socialize the grief process. And I know you know all that, but I just think we need to talk about that more often, that there is no timeline to grief. And I know that that is something you share in the work that you do, but we haven't talked a lot about that on our podcast yet. But I think that that's just such an important message. So thank you. And can you tell me a little bit more when you say the process of creating the digital story was healing?
Yeah. For myself, because I'm Asian, so I grew up sort of with a Western and Asian culture. So it's always been like balancing the best of both worlds for myself. But when it comes to things like death or life, there's just a lot more taboo around it. In the Asian culture, I find at least, is that we shy away from it. We don't talk about it so much in the sense where it's bad luck or there's no point to talk about it on whatever level that might be. And so for me, it's been really, really difficult to process my own grief. I need to speak about it or let it out or unleash it somehow, but I haven't been able to do that. And especially also the fact that my dad pursued medically assisted death, it makes it even more difficult to talk about. So I tell half of my story. I always resort to saying things like, he just really passed away with cancer, but really it was actually a medically assisted death. And so all of these things kind of added up for me and it just builds up and it just didn't do me any good. It would come out in different ways at different times. making it more difficult to manage in a sense. And so when this opportunity came, I was like, why not? And through a storytelling version of how you guys have created this workshop, it really allows us to narrate maybe like our deepest conflicts, or at least that's for me. So yeah, in that sense, it's been really, really healing.
So let me ask you, as a digital story maker, what are you hoping an audience takes away from your story in particular?
There's a few things. I think a big one is courage. And that it's just a word, but it's incredibly difficult to really build up that confidence, to have the courage to believe in yourself. So wherever that journey is, trying to build up the courage for things so that when I experience a challenge or I'm meeting resistance along the way, especially going through a MAiD process for a loved one, it's a resonating theme for many caregivers of MAiD. And we often forget because there's too much outside noises, there's too much opinions, there's too much, factors internally, externally. And it makes it very challenging. And it brought me down too. It's that constant internal battle of trying to figure out, what am I doing? Am I doing this right? But when I was able to focus on what is important and what I believe is right at the time with what I knew. And I think it's really giving the audience just this reassurance that it's okay. Even if in hindsight, I'm going to look back and realize maybe I made a mistake. That is okay. That is a mistake I had to make. That it was a step I had to make so that I could move forward, so that there is a today. And I think all of that took a lot of courage. Courage that I didn't know I had. Courage I didn't know I would build up more and I would have more of. And courage that I want to just let other people who are going through this also like believe in themselves. Yeah.
I think that's incredibly courageous of you to share all of that. I think it's of complete value for your audience because, as I've said many times, it's hard to be a squishy human, and it's hard to be a squishy human grieving, and it's hard to be a squishy human with all of that conflict with no processing space. So I think your story affords people that gentle space. That's what I inferred when you're just talking, Amy. It affords them that ability to say, I need to be perhaps gentle with myself because hard things are hard. And that's okay, as you say, but let's get to where we can be good in that space today. I really love that. Thank you very much.
And I just wanted to also say, like, with all this courage that you guys have through this workshop has helped me kind of come into and just take ownership of or reclaiming it back. It has actually, this digital story workshop has led to me making a short film about MAiD. And this story is a narrative story, and it is one for all the caregivers in the world.
That is so exciting to hear, Amy. And I am hopeful that we can learn more about that and share widely on each and every platform that we have available to us. And I know, Amy, that in creating the digital story, it was important to you to have it translated. And I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about how that process has been and why this has been important to you.
Yeah, so I'm from Taiwan, and so like Asian, Canadian, I love both identities within myself. And I speak both languages. However, life and death, it matters not to what race, what sex, what color your skin is. It does not matter. So for me, having it into other languages that are my languages as well, which is Mandarin, it's really important to me to make that, because I also just can't be super open with certain people in my family. And I think through different creative ways, it makes it a little bit more digestible, I'm hoping. And so that it's accessible. And so that maybe that door can just if it's cracked open a little today, maybe tomorrow will be a little bit more, and just eventually it could be a door wide open for just anybody. And language shouldn't be a barrier. I think that's really important to kind of bridge that, and just so that more people could be reached. Yeah.
And you're right. I think we all have a role and a responsibility to crack that door open. And so I am confident that your story will do that for many people in Mandarin and in English. And thank you so very much for sharing a little bit about your story. And I can't wait to hear what others learn from it.
Next up, we are speaking with Roberta, or Bobby as we call her, Putnam. Bobby's digital story, Something We Could Share, can be found on the Disrupting Death website, disruptingdeath.ca.
Bobby, we're really grateful on so many levels that you've joined us today. And I'm wondering what motivated you to agree to engage in digital storytelling?
I thought it was a wonderful opportunity. And to be honest, I didn't have a lot of time to think about it. And had I known how technically difficult it might have been, I think I might have thought twice. But once I started, it was wonderful because I had so much help.
And I agree. I think it is technically challenging. And that, as something as a researcher, was really important to me. I didn't want the technology to get in the way of the story. So when I hear that someone like you, Bobby, who doesn't love technology, which I totally get, stuck it through to completion, I want to know more. What motivated you to do that?
Well, I'm doing all this MAiD work because I promised my husband, who passed away 3 years, that I would continue to offer real information. And so that is why I had started doing this. But once I started, I found, looking at the pictures and putting them together with my voice, it seemed much more real. And I felt that it was really telling a story. The visual really told a story. And at the end, I wanted more time. I wanted more pictures. I wanted to make it even more perfect. It took a long time for me to get to that stage. But at the end, I could just see how valuable it was.
That is so good to hear. I'm interested, Bobby. What was the promise you made to your husband about telling real stories about MAiD?
When he decided that he wanted MAiD, right away, a friend came over and talked to him for an hour after he came home from the hospital to try and talk him out of it. And I found that very upsetting. And my husband, I think, saw or talked to 150 people on Zoom in his last 12 days. So he had a celebration of life while he was still alive. It was really wonderful. But I also said to everyone who came, because it was COVID and they were in small groups staying just for a short time because he was pretty tired, there is no discussion about MAiD. This is not the time. And some people were not very happy about it, but I just said, that's the rule if you want to come. Bob had thought about this a lot. It had been in our life because where we live, the local hospice where I volunteered for many, many years, refused to offer MAiD. And I actually quit volunteering there because of that, and within the newspaper. So it was something that was talked about a lot. And I found our local paper was in there all the time. We're printing things, this is murder and just horrible false stories. And it made me so angry that this was in the paper and people are thinking this is true. And so my husband and I talked about that. And he was a teacher, and a teacher right to the end. And he said, I want you to talk about MAiD and make people understand and take away the stigma that some people feel around that. And he was a very popular man. And I think he felt if I did that, it would help. So it was really all because of my husband. And I have to say, at times, it's been quite difficult. I'm reliving this all the time because I took part in the book, The Many Faces of MAiD, a volunteer for C-14 as a peer counselor. So my life is pretty involved with MAiD, but I'm better at it now. I'm not so emotional.
And I know I found watching all the stories a very emotional time. So I can imagine how watching your story, talking about your story brings up some challenging emotions.
Well, I have to say, listening to everyone else's or watching everyone's video, I learned so much. I cannot believe how much there was for me to learn after 3 years of heavy digging into this. It was fascinating, but wow, I learned a lot.
I think, Bobby, I mean, I'm an educator as your husband was, and I love that because I think he would love that you went into the workshop and learned so much from the people who participated, because that's that commitment to lifelong learning and going into things really with an open mind, right? Knowing that, yes, we may dwell in these spaces a lot, but that we always have something to learn, especially about the human experience behind MAiD. So you've given us a nice segue to my question for you. When people watch your story about Bob's experience with MAiD and you accompanying him, what are you hoping people take away from your story in particular?
I hope understanding. I have shown it a lot, and I've had amazing replies saying, yes, they're proud of me for doing this. But, I am only showing it to people who love them. And I haven't had anything negative. Almost everyone is in tears. And rightly so. It's, a goodbye is sad under any circumstances. But I love the video now. And it really explains a bit more how I felt, how, it was hard for me.
I think that's really important. What I've inferred there, Bobby, that hard things are so, so hard. And your commitment to your promise to Bob, like, wow, this is heavy. And yet, I think what's so amazing about you and about your story is that commitment to disseminate it because of your experience before Bob had MAiD, where people would step forward and really want to tell you what they thought. And I think words are so powerful, but I think, as you say, digital stories are that much more powerful because of those images that you felt were important to include. And so there you are with this product after this hard process for you, emotionally, etc. And now this product gets to fly in the face of that erroneous information that people are putting out there about MAiD. And I like to think that Bob's, really, really, really not only feeling honored, but he's like, that a girl. Like, I think that's an incredible thing that you've given to him and to yourself and to the people who watch it.
I think the best compliment I had was from one of his ex-students who considered Bob his mentor, who's a physician. And he wrote me and said, this changed my mind on MAiD.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a wow time for sure.
Yes. I just think that's wonderful. And I'm so very grateful that you said yes to the project and put up with the technology. The fourth digital story that we'd invite you to check out is from Joanne Hahn. And Joanne's digital story is called A Perfect Ending. Here we are talking with Joanne about what motivated her to create a digital story. So, Joanne, thanks so much for being part of the digital story creation workshops. And I'm curious, what motivated you to create a digital story, and what was that process like for you?
We got the request through Bridge C-14. And of course, I'm a volunteer with them. And MAiD is near and dear to my heart. And I think the more that we can educate people on it being an option and how it can be a beautiful ending, I want to take part in that. So I want to tell as many people as possible and make it a little bit more palatable, if you will, because as you know, I'm sure you both are aware of all of the information that's out there in the media, and it's not always correct. So I want to be able to share the story firsthand.
And what was the digital storytelling process like for you? Was it what you expected?
No, you know what, Kathy? It was a lot more intense than I expected. We got a little bit of an outline on what you were looking for, which was terrific. But once I jumped into the process, it kind of took me right back to the experience I had back in 2018 when I was supporting my friend through the journey. When Michael talked about moments. We want to nail moments. And I think there were probably 3 or 4 different moments that came up in mind before we settled on the final one. I didn't realize how impactful those moments were until we had the opportunity to bring them out and discuss them. So it was an enlightening experience, very intense, a little bit emotional too, because it took me right back. It was also really difficult for me to take those 3 months and condense it down to like 4 minutes, but it was an interesting process.
Did anything, Joanne, surprise you about the process? Did you learn anything about yourself?
I did. Again, Kathy, the moments I didn't realize were as impactful as they were. There's a part of my story where I tell that I'm in the kitchen watching my friend and her family, and they're telling her what she meant to them. And I didn't realize how impactful that little exercise was. And I'm an end-of-life doula, and I encourage people to do that, to have those conversations with their person while they're alive, to find out, how they impacted that person's life. And people find that to be a really enlightening exercise.
Then that's one of the things that really resonated for me about your story was I'm just imagining that book with the folded pages and how you started on learning about becoming an end-of-life doula and how your friend was so supportive of you in doing that.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yeah, because I just kind of fell into this after an interview with a telephone psychic of all things.
There was that part too. And I think people are going to really enjoy hearing about that.
Yeah, I know. What the heck? That's how it happened, right?
Hey,
as I said at the end of the video, I'll say it again. I believe there are no coincidences, and that this just popped up and it has evolved into a bit of a career change for me. My friend said to me, "You've got to keep doing this work," and so I made a promise.
And you are honoring her in that promise.
Absolutely. I tell the story as much as I can.
So incredible, Joanne, and so wonderful because your story resonates for me on so many levels because you touch on the humor and the feistiness of your friend and her determination at every step, even in the face of personal adversity, but also of challenges that came from the healthcare profession, things that she stood up to and said, well, no, thank you. So you putting out your story for people to view, what are you hoping that people take away from your story, Joanne?
Well, that's a good question, Carolyn. I'm hoping that they take away comfort in the process, knowing that what we're seeing in the media, especially now in light of what they're calling wakeboarding and how people drown, I hope that they take from my story that this is the way that the procedure happens and that it can be a very gentle, peaceful passing. And I hope they take away that they're able to question the healthcare team. Do it in a respectful manner. Jen was a little bit forceful sometimes because she was not being heard. And I understand that. But I also want people to understand that they can ask questions. Here's a treatment, here, try radiation or chemotherapy. And we are allowed to ask, what is that going to be like? What's that going to get me? And what am I going to go through? And then we are allowed to say, no, thank you. So I hope they take those nuggets away.
Have you shared your story with anybody, Joanne?
I have. I sent it off to Dine with Dignity Canada and, of course, MAiD Family Support Society, who I also volunteer with, given permission to C-14 to put it up on the website. I've sent it to friends of mine who know Jan, who knew her, but were not part of the MAiD experience. So I wanted the close personal friends to have a review of it first. And I think we might put it up on our website. I'm not quite sure if it's up there yet or not.
It sounds like it's going to be well shared and well appreciated. And Joanne, we are so grateful you joined us in terms of the commitment through the digital story making process
it was an amazing process. And I'm very grateful for having been part of that.
Thank you so very much for joining us today, Joanne. If you are a regular listener of our podcast, you're going to recognize the next participant that we are speaking with, Tanya Stilson. Tanya did an earlier episode on our podcast, and here she is talking about her digital story that she created that you can find on our website. Tanya's story is called Overtime. I'm interested, Tanya. I know we spoke with you on an earlier episode on our podcast, but what motivated you to give us another shot and to join our digital storytelling group?
Well, I think it's quite frankly, it's because it's you two. And it was Lauren Clark from Bridge C-14. So if my ladies ask me that they need something, I'm going to say yes. I tend to lean towards the education side and like to inform rather than dig into the vulnerability and creative side. So yeah, but the reason why I did it was because you asked me to.
Thank you for saying that. And also the weight of the responsibility that comes along with that. And so then I have to ask, Tanya, are you glad you did it?
Oh, 100%. I mean, there's lots of reasons why I'm really glad. I think, one of the biggest reasons is the people I got to meet, right? The other ladies on the digital storytelling course, to connect with them. I think somebody referred to us as superheroes at some point. And right, it was a group of women who are dealing with grief, who all have a MAiD experience in all sorts of different capacities, from friendships and parents and spouses. And that was really interesting. It was super gratifying for me. And I'm really glad I did the project. Really glad.
When people watch your story, Tanya, what do you want them to take away in particular?
I think I sometimes worry that I don't want people to only know my dad because of his choice of MAiD and his decision and his advocacy. I want them to know the man as well as the advocate. And so I think that's the challenge. And I think in the process, Mike had said, you don't have to tell the whole story. This is just one part of your story, because you're trying in 4 minutes to honor, a man who was 83 years old and was pretty cool in his own self. So yeah, I think I just want people to have a sense of, yes, these are MAiD stories, and all of these people had, advocacy and true choice, and they made their decision, but it's also the people behind those stories. And I just don't want people to watch and only watch for the sake of the MAiD part of the story, because the humans behind it and the families and the people are, it's a much longer story. I will say, Carrie Lynn, not only did you push me, but you also said to me, I've got you. And as somebody who's been an entrepreneur for decades, that's very rare for me, right? So that was a real gift. See, now I'm emotional.
I mean, it's a huge compliment, and I want our listeners to know that you have made that very clear to me in writing, but also in just the words that you choose to use when we're together. And I think what you were able to do by letting go, as you say, Mike is saying to you, this isn't the whole story, this is a piece or a moment in the story, by letting go of that urgency to represent and that almost responsibility to represent, you got to tell us about your dad, and you got to tell us about you and your dad. And I think that was such a gift for all of us, and will continue to be that, as you say, so that we can see that man behind the choice of MAiD, that true choice of MAiD. I think that's incredible.
Yeah. And I have to say, Tanya, I really love that our listeners get to hear about your dad's journey from a previous episode, and now get to match some visuals to that story as well. And I know that they're going to recognize, as we all do, that your dad was more than the MAiD story.
Yeah, for sure.
That your relationship with your dad was very much more than that. And I'm excited to hear what they think.
Yeah, me too.
Next, Carolyn and I are going to chat a bit with Kimberly Robinson. And the name of Kimberly Robinson's digital story is We Didn't Waver. Please check it out. Thank you so very much for joining us, Kimberly, today. And I'm interested, what motivated you to join our group and create a digital story of your experience with MAiD?
My experience with MAiD and with my husband's illness affected me very, very profoundly. And I felt like my experience might be able to help other people going through something similar, and definitely, help healthcare providers perhaps better understand someone's decision to opt for MAiD and be a better care provider in that space.
I bet that also seems important to me too, that idea of how people can improve their practice, their knowledge about MAiD, and how they care for people who are accessing MAiD from your experience. Is there something in particular, Kimberly, that you're hoping a healthcare provider might hear from your story?
Yeah, one of Paul's physicians who wasn't involved in his death, but was aware of it, actually reached out to him just a couple of days before he was due to have his medically assisted death and tried to talk him out of going through with the process. And my husband was so steadfast at that point that it didn't bother him, but it bothered me tremendously. That is an absolutely inappropriate thing for a medical provider to do. And it fundamentally attempts to deny patients their choice for something that is legal and available to them.
And that was one of the strong messages from your story for me too, was, as you call it, you never wavered. And I think that that is a very powerful message in terms of healthcare providers understanding people's experience and how often healthcare providers think that they can be influential, but don't realize the power that they potentially wield. And so, Kimberly, I'm interested, how was the digital story process for you?
Well, it was excruciating. It was very, very difficult, but also very healing. Now that I have the story, I think that it's something very beautiful. I share it sparingly, but with lots of different people. And knowing that someone listened to my story and, that it had an impact on them heals me a little bit more every time. The part that was difficult was revisiting my experience of Paul's death, and not just his death. His death was actually quite peaceful and beautiful. The process of MAiD leading up to it was excruciating. And, reliving the anxiety of that process was difficult. The first time Paul was assessed for MAiD, he basically wasn't approved by the first provider because he had Lewy body disease. And at the time he was first assessed, he had some delusions. And so we did a little bit of a medication tweak. And after a few weeks, he was reassessed again by a different doctor and then a follow-up by the first doctor. And he was ultimately approved. But that whole process took about 90 days. And I lived in just fear that he wouldn't be approved because he was absolutely so determined to die. And, if MAiD wasn't an option, I was afraid that he would die from suicide, and that would not be pretty for anyone. Yeah, and reliving that anxiety, it was very difficult. But as I said, I worked with the group and wrote my story and started to put it into the video format. It just really became something very precious to me.
I think that's so important to hear on many levels. And I want to say thank you for articulating that, because I was a part of that workshop with you. And so I feel grateful to know that that's where you are with your story. And I really appreciate too that you share your story sparingly, because I think we do things purposefully, right? Yeah. So I want to ask you, when your story is viewed, what are you hoping that the general public takes away from your story?
I hope that people will understand that access to MAiD in Canada is an incredible privilege, and expanding access is extremely important. because, you know, when someone gets very ill or is very ill, there's very little that they control in their lives. And my experience with Paul's MAiD was that for him, it was a way to back control. And once he had set his date, he had a 2-week period until, you know, his death. And he just blossomed, you know. He made time for people. He came out of himself. He often struggled with pain and fatigue. But in that period, he was just so peaceful. So for him, it was a very beautiful thing, and it gave him an opportunity to assert control at the end of his life and spend his last few days sharing with other people.
Kimberly, thank you so very much for not only creating and crafting a very powerful story and honoring the MAiD journey of you and your husband together, but talking with us today and sharing your story to a wider audience.
Thank you so much. This has been a very, very important project for me.
Oh, dear podcast listener, I hope you got a sense of some of the fabulous people that we have been so lucky to collaborate with on these digital stories. Some days I'm reminded really strongly how much I love my job as a qualitative researcher who gets to bring people together and is so lucky when people drag me along for the ride. So I'm hopeful now that what you are going to do is go over to our website and click on the digital stories for part 2. You've heard their voices, now see their stories, and let us know what you think. Connect with us on all of our socials on Facebook, Instagram. Many of us are on LinkedIn. That would be great. Or drop us an email via our website, disruptingdeath.ca. We would love to hear from you. So lean in and take good care, and let's keep the conversation going. When did we get here, and how? Your stories mean everything now. When did we get here, and how? Your stories mean everything now. When did we get here, and how? Your stories mean everything now. When did we get here, and how? Your story